Welcome back to the Country House podcast. And today we've got an exciting episode planned off the back of our last two episodes. We did an episode on Capability Brown. And then last week we had a fascinating discussion about the Vache Baroque festival held in the grounds of an Elizabethan country house. And got Rory and I thinking about how so many festivals are held at country houses in Capability Brown parklands. And all sorts of different types of festivals. And so today's episode, we're going to focus on country house festivals. And Rory has been doing lots of research on all sorts of different country house festivals, from music festivals to opera to I think plays,
cars,
all sorts. And so, Rory, why don't we sort of launch straight in by you telling us what is a country house festival? What does it look like? What are they?
Thank you, Geoff. Well, I suppose country house festivals, there are lots of different things. I mean, they have a sort of, on a practical level, they tend to be maybe a few tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people in a big, in the parkland around a country house that's been filled with tents and sort of big structures that people then occupy. And this could be, and we'll discuss this, it could be theatres, it could be food stalls, it could be sort of artificial racetracks, it could be all sorts of things, but basically things that need a lot of space occupying these parklands in the summer when the weather's good. And I suppose on a metaphorical level, they're also kind of, they've become part of the kind of modern season. They've become they've become some of the great punctuation marks in the social calendar for things that people do. And as everyone, lots of foreign listeners will know, England has a particularly lovely climate in the summer. We have horrible weather for most of the year. And then in the summer, from sort of June, July and August, where the kind of this lovely combination of ambient, but also very green. And so people descend on these parks because they're very pleasant to be in. So country houses in the summer becomes the focal points for these quite sort of big events, don't they, Geoff?
They do, yeah. It's funny, Rory. Last end of summer last year, sort of early autumn, Ben and I went to Weston Park, which we've done an episode on. And as we were sort of driving along the lane to get to Weston, we were stuck behind this convoy of vintage VW camper vans, combis. And it turned out that the wonderful parkland at Weston is home every year to Camper Jam, which is a festival of camper vans, which attracts over 20,000 people every year.
Of course,
and we arrived, and we were staying with Ben's lovely wife in this very pretty folly, the Temple of Diana, for the night, which has this wonderful view on a hill overlooking the park. And all we could see, our view was somewhat spoiled, because all we could see out of the lovely orangery windows were these fields and fields of modern and classic camper vans, and a big stage with sort of 80s rock music or something. And the whole thing was hilarious, but it sort of summed up, you had this tranquil sort of folly that we were staying in, beautiful parkland, a really pretty house with, fantastic interiors in the collection, and then just the park abuzz with people with a very niche interest. And
you could argue that the folly was the 18th century equivalent of a camper van. I think that would be an interesting debate to make. But yes, absolutely. No, they're completely bizarre. I mean, when I've been researching this episode, I have to say I've come across some pretty eccentric festivals, which are all utterly marvelous. I think one of the best ones was the medieval jousting festival. So that sort of just seems, I would love to go. But it seems based on what I've been sort of looking at, that there are these festivals tend to cluster around a series of themes, and the biggest themes are basically horse racing. So we'll be discussing the Badminton horse trials, which is probably the most famous example of it. Opera. Now, everyone knows about Glyndebourne, which does happen adjacent to a country house, but we're going to be talking about the Grange festival instead, which is I think sort of slightly more architectural in tone, and we'll discuss that in a bit. Then there's the Festival of Speed at Goodwood, so car racing, vintage cars, modern cars, vintage cars. That's another very popular aspect of country house festivals. We're going to talk about game fairs, so sort of rural country fairs. This time at Ragley. We're going to talk about music festivals. So music festivals are a big feature of country house parks because they need so much space. And we'll talk about the one they do at Houghton, which is, as we've discussed many times in this podcast, an epic country house. And then finally, literary festivals. And we'll talk about an exciting new one at Cliveden, which I think is probably the most recent festival of all the ones I'm going to be talking about in terms of when it was founded, but also a great sort of a great example. So these aren't necessarily the biggest examples or the most famous examples always, but they're, in my opinion, the most relevant to country houses, and in some ways the most sort of got the most talking points.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I mean, and the thing is, these topics that we're talking about, they're probably the most famous sort of types of festivals held at country houses, but there's a plethora, like you said, jousting and all sorts of other slightly more niche camper vans. And there are so many. I mean, you're right, because these parks created by Capability Brown specifically, but others like Repton too, are such vast, beautiful spaces. But they also make great because of the nature of the hill, the rolling hillocks and spaces between the trees. They're fantastic. They're a stage, really, aren't they? They're sort of a natural or a curated landscape, but they're sort of a natural amphitheatre in which to host lots of different things.
Yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought of that. They are, because they've got sort of the landscape's quite gentle, which means that construction in it's not that difficult. There's no sort of cliff edges and stuff, or kind of bogs. And they're near a house, so they're near electricity and all sorts of amenities. They drain very well. I mean, they're kind of. I mean, if the parks have been well kept up, that is. I mean, often they haven't in the UK, but if they've been well kept up, they're kind of perfect when they're dry in the summer event spaces. So as we'll discuss. Well, actually, I'll no, there's all sorts of exciting twists and bends on this journey, and we'll talk about them as we go on.
Yeah, well, I was very fortunate when I worked for Country Life. We shared an office with none other than Horse and Hound, the great equestrian magazine made famous by Hugh Grant in Love Actually. And the best chat-up line I have, of course, is that I write for Horse and Hound, like Hugh Grant did. The truth is, I did a couple of ad hoc articles for them when I worked for Country Life, and one of the things I wrote about once was Burley horse trials, also at a country house, Burley. So a horse trial, in essence, is it's an equestrian event that tests the riders and the horses across 3 different disciplines. So you've got dressage, cross country, and show jumping.
Yeah.
Dressage is essentially the things you see when a rider's making a horse dance, basically.
Kind of hopping around.
It's sort of they perform the rider and the horse perform a series of movements within an arena. And it takes a lot of discipline. It looks very elegant. It's lovely to watch. Then cross country is probably the most exciting part of a horse trial. So it's a long outdoor course with lots of natural obstacles. So rather than the sort of jumps you see at Ascot, you've got sort of ditches, water jumps. You might have logs, banks, all sorts of things. And that focuses on endurance and jumping. And then the last thing is the show jumping, which is also jumping, but is a timed event around an arena with brightly coloured fences. You've seen them sort of, poles in a stand, and that focuses on sort of more on agility and stuff like that. And the combined package, a bit like a triathlon, really, the combined passage is a horse trial. And we'll get onto badminton, but the reason why I think, linking with what we've just been talking about in terms of the natural amphitheatre nature of Capability Brown Parkland, the cross-country part of the horse trial specifically requires huge acreage of open but also varied terrain.
Oh, okay.
And that's why country houses are such a natural setting, because you might have a 1,000-acre park and it's varied, but it's also largely open in a way that naturally wooded landscapes aren't.
That's This is very, very impressive knowledge. I mean, Geoff, are you a queen? Are you a keen jockey? Have you ridden much?
Well, no, I'm not a horseman at all, but I'm very keen to improve my riding because, as our listeners might be aware, I now spend a lot of my time at a lovely little cottage on a friend's estate in Devon, and I'm about 10 minutes from a very famous beach for horse riding, for cantering and
Are you?
galloping across the beach. Yeah, Mothercombe Beach. It's on a lovely estate called Fleet, which also hosts the local point to point, the Dartmoor Hunt, and I think there looks like nothing more magical than cantering along the beach.
I can see it now, Geoff. You and me, the Country House podcast, hair flowing, the sunset.
Will you be riding side saddle, Rory?
I'll be riding side saddle, absolutely. We're having an important business discussion mid canter. That'd be great.
So I'm hoping to learn. I've got some lovely friends who said they'll teach me, so I'm hoping to take them up on that. But do you ride, Rory?
I did, not so much now. I used to ride quite a lot as a child, but I sort of unfortunately became not very good when aged about 13. I developed a sudden and dramatic allergy to horses whilst on a horse, and it had very dramatic consequences. I kept sneezing, and as I was sneezing, I kept kicking it and going faster. It was absolutely terrifying.
Isn't that funny? You can develop allergies so suddenly. My auntie developed an allergy to mangoes because she used to climb mango trees so much in Africa. It's so funny, isn't it?
That's interesting, isn't it? Well, we digress.
Well, we digress completely. But anyway, for context, that's what a horse trial is, and why it's held at the Country House. Let's talk about the most famous horse trials in Britain, perhaps in the world, which is the Badminton horse trials, which I think take place in sort of late spring, early summer every year. Tell us about that.
So each of these festivals we're going to follow chronologically through the year. So this is the first sort of big one, at least as far as country houses are concerned. So Badminton horse trials, quite an interesting story. And it goes back a little way. So the fourth Duke of Beaufort, it is the Dukes of Beaufort, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. He succeeded his brother in 1745, and he was the guy who kind of, rejigged the house and got Kent to renovate it and made it Palladian and all that nice stuff that we recognise today. So that's the iconic backdrop to this horse trials, sort of looming over all the jumps and things, and got, I think, Brown involved with the park and all this kind of stuff. And then it was the next Duke, the fifth Duke of Beaufort, who decided to focus on fox hunting after an unsuccessful day of deer hunting. So the country is the aristocracy is beginning to pivot from sort of deer hunting, which is a very kind of Tudor thing, through to fox hunting, which is a sort of more recent thing. And so from that point on, the Dukes of Beaufort are getting very big in the local hunt. The Beaufort Hunt is very famous. The Dukes were often the master of the hunt. And then this leads sort of to more recent times. So the 10th Duke of Beaufort was very, very famous as a fox hunter. He was often known simply by the name Master, so he was master of the hunt. He was the master of the horse for the royal family. He was very, very, very big on all things horses, basically. And his sort of tenure as Duke coincided with a sort of national embarrassment, which was the 1948 Olympics, when basically Britain sent a team for horse trials and did very badly. And I basically, as far as I understand it, the team consisted of British cavalry officers who didn't have much expertise in dressage and stuff like that, and were just expected to kind of put their best foot forward, or rather their horse's best foot forward, and kind of try their best. And basically, the Duke realised that we were utterly useless at this, and for a country that's meant to be quite horsey, this was very embarrassing. So he thought, to give our team, to kind of improve the homegrown scene of horse trials, he will give up his park to host an event, basically. And that was how it was born. And
for context, just thinking about what I mentioned about the need for space. So Badminton House is one of the great ducal palaces of England, but it's still, which is very unusual considering how much estates shrank in the 20th century, it still sits, I think, in about 52,000 acres as an estate, of which the park is about 5,000 acres. So it's an enormous park.
It is huge,
within an enormous estate. So plenty of space for not only the actual trials, but all the people and the pop-up tents.
I wonder if the park, I don't know, but I wonder if the park is now partly maintained because of the horse trials. And I wonder if it's become a bit of a symbiotic thing, that the houses that have kept the parks and not, turn them to agriculture have done so partly because of the festivals in them.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. Yeah, it's possible. I think
don't
also, I mean, what's lovely is, when you think about when we've talked about diversification of estates, Badminton has become so iconic. I'm sure it makes a lot of money for the estate, which in turn allows them to maintain the park and the gardens and all that. So yeah, I think you're right. There isn't. It's extraordinary that they probably generate enough income from that horse trials to maintain the park and not have to farm it for the rest of the year.
Well, I mean, it's an iconic event. It's a totally iconic event, and I mean, it's famously difficult as well. I mean, when it started, I think 8 of the 22 riders, failed to complete the course at all, on the cross-country course, that is. So it's very difficult, but it's fantastic watching. It's very exciting. It's very buzzy. I think it celebrated its 75th anniversary in 2024, so it's been going for a long time now, and it's one of the great events, not just in the British racing calendar, as it were, but also in the globally up there with the other big names. So it's a testament both to the 10th Duke and his love of horses, as well as our kind of national keenness on riding, more widely. But we've got a lot of festivals to get through, so we should keep powering on.
I think it's worth noting that Badminton and Burghley horse trials, we've done an episode, I think we did a 2-parter last year on Burghley House. Badminton and Burghley make up 2 of the 7 global 5-star eventing courses. So there are 7 eventing courses across the world. 1 in Australia, I think 2 in the US, 1 in Germany, 1 in France, and then 2 in the UK, which are Badminton and Burghley. And it's interesting that both of them are in these extraordinary landscape grounds. So we've got Badminton, and again, what's lovely, just linking with the broader country house theme of the pod, is the setting, the backdrop. You've got this magical event happening with this extraordinary house behind that has work by, it has bits of Baroque, it has bits of Palladian, it has all sorts of different architectural styles. This wonderful ducal residence behind you, and it just adds to, I suppose, we've talked about this quite a lot recently in terms of, we talked about it with on the Vache episode last week, the gravitas that having a historic home adds to an event, in terms, and the magical nature it contributes to the whole vibe. So we've got Badminton as an example of horse trials. You mentioned, Rory, opera festivals, and we obviously touched on this last week with the Vache. Glyndebourne being the most famous, home of the Christie family, of Christie's auction house. But the Grange is an interesting one because the house is quite an unusual house in quite an unusual condition. And it's quite an extraordinary festival. Can you tell us about the Grange Festival, Rory, and what it is and the landscape in the house?
Well, thank you, Geoff. Architecturally, it is fascinating. I mean, the Grange Festival takes place at the Grange House, which is in Hampshire. And although Glyndebourne is very beautiful, and we should do an episode on it at some point, to my mind, personally, the Grange is sort of even more special. And actually, I mean, the house is basically a ruin, so it's not sort of top of the pops country house style. It's more about ambience, I think. And although again, Glyndebourne's fabulous.
It's sort of, rather than ruined, it's sort of a shell, isn't it? So
it is. So
all the walls are intact, but it's not furnished, or
it's amazing, and it basically looks like I mean, the easiest way to describe it is it looks like a sort of giant English version of the Parthenon on a beautiful sort of willowy English bank, kind of Capability Brown style. And that stylistic choice is utterly deliberate, and enhanced actually by the fact that it's slightly ruinous. I mean, it's so romantic. But the house is there, has an interesting story. So very briefly, basically, Henry Drummond, so one of the owners, in about 1804, commissioned William Wilkins, who also out of interest designed the National Gallery in London, to transform a standard restoration house into something that was de rigueur neoclassical. It was based on very active Greek examples. I can't pronounce the examples here, they're in my notes, but basically real temples and architectural ruins in Greece were used as inspirations for it. And that's partly why it looks so it looks so Greek. A wing was added by Charles Robert Cockerell, famous architect, as well a bit later on, which I think has is now very useful to the festival. I think it's where they have their theatre these days. Cockerell had rather a good line about it. He describes the whole ensemble of the house and the park as there is nothing finer and nothing like it on this side of Arcadia, which is something that people quote a lot today when talking about it. It had rather an interesting subsequent history, which also feeds into what it's used for today. There were great house parties in the 19th century, attended by people like Lord Tennyson, the famous poet. Then, amazingly, it was owned by an American during World War II, and Churchill and Eisenhower met there to discuss the invasion of Europe. So it's had this extraordinary story. But then it sort of, had the classic country house fall, and it was kind of picked up in the 1970s by sort of government departments and was sort of converted for operas in 1998. And then in 2002, a new theatre was built in the Orangery and won a shed ton of awards. I haven't got time to list them all, but basically Reba loved it. Everyone loved it. And it's now the setting for an opera festival. But I mean, I hope I've sort of given a sense, having through that description, described how magical it is. I mean, it's perfect as a setting for opera. It is so romantic, so beautiful.
It's interesting. It's that wonderful combination, I suppose, of which sums up the English country house opera, which is so often the operas are Italian or French or whatever, Russian, German, but European, but in such an English setting. And what's interesting with the Grange is the landscape is quintessentially English, isn't it? It was, I think, the landscape was actually done before the house was sort of turned into a Greek revival masterpiece. Yeah. And so the English landscape gardens are so quintessentially English and picturesque, and then you've got this magnificent, very European Greek revival house, and it's so whimsical. It embodies what the English country house opera is about.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's very whimsical. It's a lovely, it's sort of magical. I mean, it's a world where you are suspended, where you are transported. And that's sort of what opera's all about. Other than its connection to the continent, I agree that's a strong part of it.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, it's a just insanely beautiful place. And what they've done there, the house, the setting aside, what they've done at the Grange is quite cool in terms of sort of artistic development. So they host lots of marvelous things, lots of wonderful operas. I believe this year they've got Verdi's La Traviata, and they've got rather interesting. I'm probably going to mispronounce it, but they've got a Baroque opera ballet, Les Indes Galantes, by Rameau. But so lovely Baroque situation. But then I think they're incorporating contemporary street dancing styles into it by a famous French choreographer who's a pioneer of hip hop. So they've really kind of gone to town in combining old and new. And there seems to be a theme at the Grange. I mean, that they are, although it's sort of very bucolic and you go along in your black tie and you listen to beautiful old opera, it does seem that their approach is very contemporary. So they've also done a Queen at the Opera sort of night to mark 50 years of Queen's album, A Night at the Opera, with the BBC, and they have. I was astonished when I was looking this up that the and this is a broader theme throughout these country house festivals. I have to say, the outreach programs they have are amazing. So I mean, just to give you a taste of it, they had over 1,200 young people engaged in sort of cultural workshops and opera creation, all this kind of thing in the local community. There's sort of loads of open house opera stuff for all the local school kids who come along, meet all the opera singers, meet the choreographers, etc. They had 70 young people make their own opera using AI. So they basically were teaching children how to use AI, how to program it, and to think about all the different aspects of opera creation. And very coolly, the opera was called AI and Us. So it was all about sort of, where's the line between creativity and AI. So I think it sounds like a really thriving community, a very interesting, good example.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting again, thinking about, so what's unusual, I think, of all the festivals we've talked about, the country house operas festivals generally they do have proper opera houses built in the grounds, and so I think it's the same with the Grange. Is the opera house Rory housed within the ruins of the house?
So it's in that orangery wing. So it's sort of that there was a later wing that was added by Cockerell, and I believe that the theatre's in there.
Oh yes, you're right. I can just see from so a little bit like at Neville Holt, where they've sunken the opera house or the theatre into the stable block. So in this case,
similar idea.
The orangery, but it's lovely. What makes it lovely, I think, like Neville Holt, is that whereas Glyndebourne, you've got this, pretty house, and then this enormous rotunda next to it, which kind of looks quite stark, a bit like you get the same at to a lesser extent at Garsington, where there's a big modern opera house in the grounds and stuff. But what's lovely at the Grange is it still remains it remains unspoilt as a landscape. But again, it's that lovely from a festival goer's perspective. It's that lovely idea of like all country house visits, you can make a day of it. Whereas in Covent Garden, when you go to the opera, you turn up maybe half an hour before, have a drink in the Old Flower Hall, and then go and watch the opera. Whereas the beauty of a country house opera, and particularly the Grange, is you can arrive, I think, from 3 p.m. or something.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
The opera only starts at 7 or something, and then you can sort of set up your picnics, wander around the grounds.
Well, I have to say, for people who don't live in London, it's very funny because I can't remember when does it start. Let me look at the date again. Sorry, when it goes throughout the summer, it starts in June. Badminton. But it's terribly funny because you get to sort of June, July, and it gets pretty hot in London. It's one of the hottest places in the UK. And you'll be kind of minding your own business at Paddington Station or whichever station it is, I can't remember. And you see people legging it in black tie in the middle of the afternoon, and that they're going to some opera festival in the middle of nowhere. And it becomes a sort of English tradition, basically, to be late for opera, because it's at a very kind of inconvenient time in your black tie, and it's just one of these funny national traditions. But it's lovely. It's intrinsically immersive, is the thing. You're getting out of London, or indeed wherever you live, you're going to this beautiful location, beautiful music. I mean, opera is all about transporting you into a totally different world, I think. So the two work very well together. But let's crack on.
Well, I was going to say, in contrast to that, but again, in the home counties, so spitting distance from London, easy day trip. We've got Goodwood. Now, we did an episode on Goodwood about 6 or 8 months ago with the curator, talking about the collection and the history of the house. Do look back at that, lovely listeners, if you want some more context on the house. But Goodwood is probably the most famous estate in England for having very early on diversified its income streams and set up all sorts of other things. And the main thing, I think, is it's the racing aspect. Now, there's the horse racing, but there's also specifically the cars, classic and contemporary cars. Tell us about the Festival of Speed at Goodwood, Rory.
So yes, as you say, there is a tradition. There seems to be a preoccupation with speed, as it were, at Goodwood, and this goes back again a very long way. So the first Duke of Richmond, who was the legitimate son of Charles II, basically bought Goodwood as a hunting lodge because there was an excellent hunt nearby. And this then sort of translated a couple of centuries later into the Goodwood racecourse, glorious Goodwood, for race meetings. I think that was in the 19th century when that started. And then that translated the following century into the 9th Duke opening up the motor track. Also, strangely, 1948, same year as Badminton starting. And he drove around it in a marvellous car, a Bristol 400. And it was all very kind of glamorous and sort of kind of, very Downton Abbey, I suppose. And then that shut down. And in the 1990s, Lord March, is he now the Duke? I think he is.
Now the Duke, yeah.
Anyway, he's very keen on cars, and he wanted to bring back the motor racing to Goodwood, but could on this track, but couldn't. He couldn't get the sort of necessary permits and so on. So he basically decided to do again what the Duke of Beaufort did, which is just to open up his own grounds and to do it in his park, and it's fantastically successful. So the Festival of Speed is the kind of modern bit, as opposed to Goodwood Revival, which is about vintage cars. So Festival of Speed is a hill climb, lasts for 4 days, very challenging course, and to my mind, one of the coolest things about it is that it's become a bit of a hub for displaying state-of-the-art, very high-tech cars. So they have this thing called the Future Lab, where big car brands illustrate their kind of latest tricks. So they've shown autonomous trucks, prototype flying cars, autonomous delivery vehicles, all this kind of stuff. So I mean, these things are, these are very, very significant changes in car technology, which are kind of exciting investors all over the world. And here they are being displayed to the public in a country house park. So it's very cool. And they do other amazing things, like they have an enormous sort of very, very cool car display in front of Goodwood itself, which is always extraordinary. And it attracts vast numbers of people. I mean, in 2003, for example, we're talking about 158,000 people. So this is a very popular event, and very high tech. Lovely, combining the Goodwood, which is a country house, with incredibly high tech cars. I just love the combination.
It's extraordinary how it's evolved in the past 30 years. In that, obviously, you mentioned, Rory, that there had been the original Goodwood motor circuit, which closed in the 1960s. What's interesting is when Charlie March, as he then was, now the Duke of Richmond, wanted to revive motor racing at Goodwood, he couldn't get planning permission to reopen the old Goodwood circuit initially. And so the idea was to race up the driveway. So the initial, right back when it was founded in 1993, the idea was that people would drive up the drive and watch the cars go fast right up to the front door. And what's fun is he expected the first event in 1993, he expected just a small crowd, a couple of thousand people, and turned out 25,000 people came that first year, clogging up the roads completely, and really sort of then paved the way for them to then get the permission to reopen the old circuit and expand. And it's like all these things. It starts off as a small hobby, a passion project, a bit like the Country House podcast, doesn't it? It starts off as a passion project and then grows
into a vast commercial empire. Yes.
But no, it's fun. It was his hobby, it was his passion project, and it's turned out to be, his greatest life, one of his greatest life works.
It's pretty cool. I mean, it's now a major. It like it deliberately they don't host it, for example, at the same time as the Grand Prix, because they don't want to compete with each other. I mean, it's become a big thing.
Do you have Goodwood revival? So it links. Goodwood has basically consecutive festivals throughout the summer. So it has obviously the Goodwood, but then it also has Goodwood Revival, which is also motor racing related, isn't it?
Yes. So another aspect. I mean, Goodwood Festival of Speed. Goodwood is probably quite unique amongst country houses in that we're talking about state of the art racing, car racing. However, Goodwood Revival is a little bit more representative because a lot of country houses have vintage car exhibitions, as it were, in the parks. Although Goodwood Revival is probably the most famous or the biggest. It's a 3-day festival in September, in the autumn. Lots of beautiful cars, specifically between 1948 and 1966. So when the original circuit was active. Lots of people dressed in period clothes. It's all terribly sort of glam.
It's quite greedy. A lot of sort of 1930s, 1940s wartime uniforms and pillbox hats and all sorts of things, isn't it?
It's all lots of dressing up. And who would you come at? I can imagine you as a policeman, Geoff, coming in a sort of 19.
I think I think good question. Who would I come as? Something from the 1920s or 30s, or a soldier. And I was never cut for the army, but maybe I could pretend for a day. Who would you go as?
I can see that. I go as a femme fatale. I'd be there with my sort of fur, looking very glamorous. Absolutely. Probably overheating. Anyway, and but they get
apparently, I love this. Just in terms of some fun anecdotes about that. So, well, firstly, you mentioned how a lot of country houses do have their own sort of classic car festivals, but what's unusual with Goodwood is because it has the racetrack. It's a much more interesting day out because you're not just walking through parked cars looking at how beautiful they are. You're actually watching them race, which is quite fun. But a couple of fun little anecdotes which I sort of dug out was firstly, back in when the revivals first started, the great motor racer Sir Stirling Moss raced at Revival in his 80s and did very well. Rowan Atkinson, Mr. Bean, has raced the Vintage
Bean.
Jaguar wearing tweed at Goodwood Revival.
Very nice.
And rather funnily, they have these sort of mock 1950s police officers who are in fact actors, who sometimes do sort of fake arrests of spectators if they're wearing the wrong clothes. If you wear a pair of jeans, you might get handcuffed by a 1950s police officer whilst at Goodwood.
All my dreams come true. It'd be fantastic.
So it's a really, and it's actually also a great day out for kids, because apart from the fact that, you know, boys and girls can see old cars and fast cars and everything, it's just, there's so much going on, you know. So and again, what's interesting is in terms of numbers, it attracts, I think, almost as many as the Festival of Speed. I think it attracts again about 150,000 people, you know, and it sort of dovetails with it. So it's an extraordinary, and in terms of actually the sort of diversification of the estate, I mean, it's fascinating. So you've got Festival of Speed attracting 200,000 visitors plus, and then Revival attracting a further 150,000. You've got huge amount of revenue from tickets, sponsorship, hospitality, and then what's hilarious, and I always love this, is how many spin-offs Goodwood's managed to do. So, you know, starting with Glorious Goodwood, then Goodwood Festival of Speed, then Goodwood Revival. They also have Goodwood, which is their festival of dogs. We haven't done a whole special section, Rory, on Goodwood, the festival.
No, I was waiting for when Goodwood was going to you know, bark its way into appearance.
But I've got a good from the current Duke of Richmond, who just said, he commented a few years ago, and he said, when asked about the festivals he set up and the successful monetization of the estate, the quote was, "We didn't just save Goodwood, we reimagined it." And it's a lovely idea that he didn't just create something to generate an income to put the lead on the roof. He actually reimagined the entire estate as an entire enterprise, really.
Yeah, Goodwood is now, I mean, I didn't really know what Goodwood was actually until a few years ago. And it to me, the name was just I didn't think about it, but it was synonymous with glamour, speed, with summer. You know, it was sort of something, in my head, it was a mix of Edward VII house parties, which it was famous for in the, you know, the Edwardian period, and horses and all that kind of stuff. So it really has become an iconic brand, which is rare for a country house. But another little fun detail I liked, which is very sweet, is that there's also during Goodwood Revival a pedal car race for children, which is named after the courtesy title, or I think it's the courtesy title, called the Setrington Cup, which I just love. I love the idea of all these little kids in their pedal cars racing for this.
Now, from Revival and motor cars to the best of the countryside, the game fair has had various iterations over the years and has been held at various country houses, but is now held at Ragley Hall. Yeah, Rory, can you tell us what the game fair is, what game is, for those who don't know in England, the game fair is, and then also a bit about Ragley, why it's held there, what Ragley looks like, that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, game fair in a way is slightly misleading, because game typically means sort of, I suppose, animals that in the context that we're talking about, the game fair, country sports and all that kind of thing, it talks about dead animals and pheasants and partridges and venison and, you know, all that kind of thing. But the festivals, I mean, this particular festival's about rather more than that, as I'll explain. But it's a memorable name, and certainly there's an awful lot to do with field sports. So it's really a sort of, as far as I understand it, I went to one when I've been to a few actually game fairs in my time. But they're sort of hubs for everything to do with rural life, basically. And this can range from traditional country sports, so shooting and fishing and falconry, to the latest innovations in tractor design, all sorts of stuff like that, which, as we all know, is incredibly complicated. You have gun dog competitions, shooting competitions. You've got, clay pigeon stuff going on. You've got people learning how to fly fish, course fishing, fly tying, which is incredibly complicated. You have people bring their dogs along and have a bit kind of good wolf situation, so bail jumping and basically seeing how well trained people's dogs are, a bit like a horse. A bit like dressage, I suppose, but for dogs. You have And then, hundreds, sometimes thousands of stalls to do with artisan kind of country life, big brands, all the way down to very small brands. Anything to do with country living. It could be clothes, it could be homeware. And then something else that they make quite a big thing of is cooking. So they have a lot of cooking demos, famous chefs who come along and explain, if you are eating, or if you are procuring your own food, how do you best preserve it and present it and cook it and all this kind of thing. So it's very much about, it's about country living and sustainability and all this sort of thing as well. So it's a wonderful celebration of rural life.
And I think it's known as the Glastonbury of the countryside. And it's very much, if Glastonbury where, young people go wearing their sort of hippie clothes or whatever, the game fair is very much tweed and Land Rovers and guns and all sorts of other things.
But it's cross class though. It's not just.
It is. Well, that's the beauty of the countryside. I find this when I go to the point-to-points down here or in Devon or hunt meets. Without getting into the politics of field sports, actually, the countryside is a huge, in many ways, a huge leveler because everyone loves it. So many people love it from every class and background and demographic. And likewise, you see that at hunt meets, at point-to-points, at game fairs and other things. You've got people, farm hands through to the grandest country house owners and everyone in between, all embracing what the countryside has to offer. And it's such tonic for the soul. And in terms of the setting, so the game fair, I know it's been held at it's always traditionally, interestingly, been held at country houses. Perhaps, it's symbolic of that sort of a country house being a sort of miniature kingdom in the countryside that brings together people from all different backgrounds, upstairs and downstairs and everyone in between. In the same way,
enormous farms.
Well, exactly. So in the past, I know the game fair has been held at Blenheim in Oxfordshire. It's been held at Harwood House in Yorkshire and at Hatfield in Hertfordshire. But the last few years, it's been pretty consistently held at Ragley Hall in Warwickshire. Do you know much about Ragley, Rory?
Well, I know a little bit. I mean, it's it's a beautiful classical house. It's the home of the Marquis of Hertford, or was the Marquis of Hertford. It had interiors by it's been modified by Gibbs and Wyatt, incredibly famous architects. I mean, I believe again the parks by Brown. It's just a very beautiful sort of. I mean, I don't quite know how to describe whether it would be. To me, it actually looks sort of Baroque in a way, but I'm not quite sure whether one would call it Baroque. But it's just a lovely country house.
It's a very pretty, almost how you imagine a sort of Jane Austen-esque country house. It's not dissimilar to Kedleston in that it's got a triangular pediment on columns at the front, and then it's got a sort of rectangular pediment at the back. I mean, what's interesting, so it is, you're right, the Marquesses of Hertford, the Seymour family, one of the most ancient, great noble families in England. And you're right, what's interesting is, Rory and I both frequented the Wallace collection, which is held in the Hertford House on Manchester Square in Marylebone in London. And what's interesting is the Wallace collection is a privately run museum of the London collection of the Marquesses of Hertford, because one of the Marquesses basically didn't have any sons except an illegitimate son, and because the title would therefore go to a cousin, and in those days the principal seat was always entailed to the title, it meant that he couldn't leave Ragley Hall to his illegitimate son who he loved, but he could there was no entail on the London townhouse, so he filled the London townhouse with his most valuable collection of art and left that to his son, whose wife in turn left it to the nation. But it's interesting because then Ragley went sideways to the cousin, and it's still the seat of the Marquesses of Hertford today. And again, it's a lovely, I suppose the game fair is another example of how these houses are all having to diversify. But again, the house provides a wonderful backdrop. And you're right, there are, in terms of architecture, it's interesting. There is certainly Baroque elements. I think it was Robert Hooke who worked on it initially in the 1680s. And so I suppose that is sort of end of the English Baroque period, isn't it? 1680. Well, actually,
beginning, actually.
Yeah, beginning. So Robert Hooke sort of started on it, but then you're right. Later there was Rococo plasterwork added in the 18th century. all sorts of different people
All
worked
sorts of
on it.
exciting things.
Yeah, like most country houses. But although it's evolved a lot interior wise and exterior, the exterior is of a piece, a period.
Yeah.
It's not a
Very regular.
House. Yeah, and again, what's interesting is the grounds, which I think the estate is about 6,500 acres, and the park is by Capability Brown, which again ties in with our episode from a few weeks ago in this curation of this open, natural-looking curated landscape. So we
march swiftly onwards.
We've got Ragley Hall on the one side and the game fair, and then sort of almost to the more contemporary opposite extreme, or more, I suppose, very different is Houghton. Tell us about Houghton Hall, home of the Marks of Cholmondeley. We haven't done an episode yet because I think we're saving it because it's such an extraordinarily
mega one, isn't it? Yeah.
Now, Houghton has got a few festivals. I know it doesn't. I know, famously it has every year it has a contemporary art exhibit.
Well, we'll get on to that. So
tell us about their music festival, all the different things that go on at Houghton.
Sure. So Houghton is probably, of the houses we've mentioned, the most famous, because it was. I mean, it's a titan really in the English sort of country house scene. It was designed for Sir Robert Walpole, our first Prime Minister, really as a kind of holiday villa, really. The outsides by Gibbs, a lot of the insides by William Kent. He developed there an absolutely astonishing picture collection, much of which I believe is currently in Russia. It was bought by Catherine the Great. It was considered so good. So an artistic hub really right from the get-go. And that has been continued by the current Marquis, who is very, very keen on contemporary sculpture. So the gardens now are festooned with beautiful modern sculptures, not dissimilar to Neville Holt, actually. But he's a very, very keen and knowledgeable collector. And I suppose the kind of weekend vibe, the kind of holiday house vibe of Houghton was sort of naturally then extended into a music festival. So the festival, it's interesting, and it's such a contrast to the game fair. The Houghton Festival, despite the very civilized setting, ironically, is probably the most kind of, in terms of music, one of the wildest festivals. It's about kind of, as far as I understand it, house and techno music. So it's very, very heavy, innovative music. It's not kind of ABBA tribute bands. But what's interesting is it's done in an incredibly thoughtful way. So it's all curated by this DJ called Craig Richards, who founded the festival. And the festival is unique amongst a lot of English festivals because it has a 24-hour license. So it goes through the day, through the night. And they have all these incredible, kind of often emerging names in the music scene. But they set all the stages in ancient woodland in the park. And they're beautifully designed, really, really beautifully designed wooden stages. And they're interspersed with incredible contemporary modern sculpture sort of exhibits that kind of wrap around the trees and sort of suspended between the trees and things like that. And they're really, really beautiful, I have to say. Often sort of very naturalistic in tone. And there's also that aside, there's also a kind of totally different side to the festival, which is about wellness. So they've got kind of sort of healthy Mexican restaurant which floats on the lake, and you can get sort of bust out from the festival into the park to see all the rest of the sculptures. They have tents, or rather, I think they're actually hard facilities, kind of beautiful cabins where you can sort of see healers and masseurs, and you can lie on a hammock, you can do yoga, breath work, sound baths, life drawing, saunas. I mean, it just goes on. It's Geoff's dream.
Yeah, well, you know what, Rory? I'm not really into techno, electronic music, but all the other stuff you're describing makes it sound like a wonderful place.
Sounds quite fun. I know. I was quite surprised because the reputation of it's for being kind of quite heavy, but actually, incredibly similar.
Interestingly, I hadn't realized that I had to do some research on this. It's described as an underground festival. And I've always wondered what makes a festival or a gig underground. And apparently it's the type of music.
Yeah. It's quite sort of out there. I mean, I didn't think you and I would have a clue how to dance to it,
No.
but it's it's connoisseur, shall we say?
Do you think we could get away with a Venetian waltz?
After we've ridden inside saddle, yeah. No, we could go, Geoff. There are some very, very nice boutique Mughal sort of style tents, and we
Yeah,
can
you
do
like that? Yeah.
we can do some performance art and life drawing and sort of basically perhaps skip the music bit. But I have to say, I mean, in all seriousness, I was very surprised. It sounds amazing. It sounds absolutely amazing. And in a way, a lot more authentic than Glastonbury.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting. The authenticity nature is emphasized. I know that the Houghton Festival has a strict no branding and no sponsorship policy.
Yes,
it allows us focus to stay on the music and the art.
And there's very poor phone signals, so you can't really post about it on Instagram and stuff. So it's really about people who love music. And then
it coincides with the contemporary art exhibition they have every year at Houghton. So you mentioned, Rory, that as you're wandering the grounds during the festival, you see that. But what's interesting is sort of separately throughout the whole summer, Houghton hosts every year an extraordinary large-scale contemporary art exhibition. And so I think this year they had a guy called Stephen Cox. But last year they had two artists. They had Anthony Gormley, famously designed the Angel of the North, and Magdalena Odundo. But the Gormley ones, interestingly, they had 100 iron figures that were sort of spaced out across 300 acres of the landscape. So again, thinking about the capability, the English landscape at these country houses in terms of the way these figures were placed.
It's really cool.
Really cool. And then, I mean, one that I thought was really interesting, I'm trying to remember which year it was, but they had this sort of long channel of rocks, which they sort of at Houghton. And I'm trying to remember, I think it was called, I'm trying to remember who the artist was, but
I think one of the coolest things that
they've had everyone from Anish Kapoor to Damien Hirst, and even retrospective, they had a big exhibition of Henry Moore sculptures in 2019. So yeah, it's and a mix. The contemporary art they use is so mixed. Anthony Gormley's iron. They had these rocks I mentioned. Henry Moore sculptures. Damien Hirst, I think, did the interiors, focused on the interiors with sort of with paintings and sculptures. And then I think back in 2015, an artist called James Turrell did an immersive light experience. And so it's quite fun, the different mediums in which these artists practice.
It is. And they do really amazing stuff. Like you can dance the night away at the festival, and then you can get on a sort of little choo-choo train that takes you into the park and then watch the sun rise over the sculptures and stuff like that, which I have to say, I think sounds rather magical. Let's move on to the final.
The final one. So this is our important one in terms of probably the festival that I'm most familiar with, and that is literary festivals, and specifically the Cliveden Literary Festival. We still haven't done our episode on Cliveden either, which we need to do. But Rory, tell us about Cliveden, the house, and the festival.
Well, it's a beautiful classical house, very imposing, 5 miles from Windsor Castle. Politically, I believe it was built by the Dukes of Buckingham. And it was sort of an unofficial political hub in the kind of, I suppose it must have been the Dukes of Buckingham were big in the kind of 1600s, I suppose. So it became this sort of this important locus for political discussion, especially because it was so near Windsor and London and so on. Then it was redone architecturally by Barry, so the guy who designed what's known as Downton Abbey, Highclere, also did Cliveden, which is kind of amazing. It shows you the versatility of the Victorian architects, actually, because obviously...
And he did the exterior of the Palace of Westminster, the House of Parliament.
And he did, exactly, funnily enough, Westminster as well, the House of Parliament, the outside of that. So he could design in both a Gothic, or perpendicular, and a classical style, but it's very impressive, big, kind of Victorian, lots of terrace big.
It's Italian, really, isn't it?
It is exactly Italian at classical, then sort of kind of tapering down through a series of terraces into this sort of vast park.
Which then extends down to the Thames.
Exactly. And it's sort of intellectually I mean, appropriately, of all the houses we've discussed, probably had sort of the most significance. Quite apart from all the political discussions going on under the Buckinghams, it also acted very much as a salon, really from the get-go. I mean, and has hosted everyone from Alexander Pope to Tennyson, George Bernard Shaw, Jonathan Swift, Sir Winston Churchill. You know, they've all been known to stay there. So it's very much been again a hub for conversation.
But it became most famous, didn't it, Rory? Because it became the home of perhaps the most famous, Anglo-American family. Tell us about the Astors link.
So Nancy Astor became its chatelaine in the 20th century. And the Cliveden set became a thing, and she used to invite, again, loads of significant people: Charlie Chaplin, the Asquiths, Arthur Balfour, Lawrence of Arabia, Gandhi, Churchill, Roosevelt, all stayed there. So one can only imagine the kinds of conversations that it's witnessed.
And Nancy Astor, notably, was the first ever female member of Parliament, which was slightly not without its sort of controversy, because she was American, married to an Anglo-American, Lord Astor. And, you know, she's famously, the quotes between her and Churchill have gone down in history, you know, all the, you know, Winston, if I were your wife, I'd poison your tea. Nancy, if I were your husband, I'd drink it, sort of thing. So wonderful anecdotes. But we have all sorts of, and she really, like you said, she made Cliveden the most, and then famously Cliveden hit the headlines, didn't it, in the 90s?
Yeah, it did. So in the 1960s, I think you're right, it was, you know, going strong as this lovely location for house parties. And at one of the house parties was a young woman called Christine Keeler, who I think went swimming naked in the swimming pool. And then this was caught by John Profumo, who was another guest who was Secretary of State for War. And they had a love affair, which toppled the government, quite literally.
Because she was also having an affair with a Soviet spy,
KGB agent or something.
That's
very
right,
embarrassing. Anyway, it was all pretty yucky, but it was very, very famous, and it was a sort of I mean, it's all in the Crown, guys. Look it up; it's fantastic. But
and then Cliveden was left by the Astors to the National Trust, who in turn lease it to a luxury hotel company. So I think National Trust members can visit the gardens. The house is a very smart hotel, I believe. Love her or loathe her, it's the place where Meghan Markle spent the night before her wedding to Prince Harry.
Yes, that's true. That is true. Yeah.
But tell us, in the last few years, Cliveden has hosted the Cliveden Literary Festival.
Yes.
What is it, and what is its significance?
So in 2017, a group of eminent writers decided to kind of form a board and to basically create the Cliveden Literary Festival, to sort of, you know, take up this amazing history, amazing social history that was innate in the house, and sort of channel it into a cultural, an academic, intellectual, cultural festival. A literary festival tends, I mean, it's slightly different to the other ones we've mentioned in that a lot of it's taking place in the house, but essentially it's the same as tents, really. You know, you've got different rooms acting as theatres where different conversations take place throughout the day. I think it's for a weekend, long weekend type thing. It was only established 7 years ago, and maybe a bit longer. Maybe it was 8 years ago. Sorry, but it's like, I mean, it's just that they've managed to harness the most extraordinary writers. So last year alone, they had Salman Rushdie talking to Ian McEwan about some literary careers. They had Emily Maitlis talking about kind of, you know, her career in the spotlight. The ex-head of MI6, Alex Younger, talking to the historian Niall Ferguson about threats from China and Russia and all this kind of thing. And then the historians Simon Sebag Montefiore talking about Jerusalem with Tom Holland, William Dalrymple on the Mughals, etc. So there's a kind of wonderful blend of history and contemporary politics and all this kind of thing. So very much keeping in tradition with what Cliveden's kind of been all about for, you know, 200-300 years. And it's been described, I mean, many times as basically one of the best literary festivals in the world. Certainly the most beautiful. So it's quite a big deal, and it's very cool. And we very much like to get invited if anyone is listening from Cliveden.
I mean, wonderfully, it's Hay on Wye was historically the great literary festival in Britain for years, the Hay Literary Festival. But firstly, it's miles away in Herefordshire. And secondly, it's very much. I think Bill Clinton famously called Hay on Wye the Woodstock of the mind. It's become, and I love that, but it's very much, it's very highbrow. It's very much sort of for diehard bibliophiles. Whereas Cliveden is closer to London and it has a bit of glitz and glamour to it, both in terms of its location and its offering, which I think makes it more accessible. Hay is very highbrow. It's really the diehard supporters of the authors who are speaking there. Whereas I think Cliveden has made literature and literary festivals a lot more accessible in terms of its setting, partly, and that's where the country house setting helps so much. I think in terms of it gives people other things to see. It gives people, you can, even if you want to, because it's obviously also a hotel and that famous swimming pool with the where the perfumery affair took place. I know because I used to be a member of the Cliveden Health Spa briefly when I lived. Well, I worked for a client for 6 months nearby, and I decided to join the smartest spa in the area, which was Cliveden.
Did you try and tempt any secretaries of state by some Geoff?
The beauty is you can get a day pass to use the pool, so it can make, again, a really fun family day out, because there are so many other things to offer. There's wonderful walks along the Thames. You can do boat trips on the Thames, all sorts of things. So it's that wonderful idea that country houses offer the complete package in terms of history, beauty, things to do for all ages, and so I suppose that ties up really the sort of the main different festivals that we've focused on. Rory, before we finish, I just have a couple of little brief questions. I sort of touched on this now, but what do all the festivals we talked about have in common? And off the back of that, why is it that country houses make such successful venues for festivals?
Well, funny, I'll sort of answer that back to front. I think it's a very simple answer to that, actually, which is, as we know, as we hope our listeners sort of understand from listening to the podcast, they are receptacles. Country houses are receptacles, extraordinary receptacles for history. They are, many of them are kind of world-class standard museums dotted around the UK. And a lot of them have a certain focus, a certain thing that they're particularly well known for, because of owners being particularly interested or whatever. And so it seems to me that all these particularly successful festivals have somehow extrapolated on a particular thing that they're known for. So, for example, the Grange, it's this incredible Grecian location and has made itself about whimsy and opera and the imagination. Goodwood, famous for speed, has become a hub for cars. Houghton, famous for sort of cutting edge arts, has become a cutting edge music festival, and so on. Cliveden, it's got its literary heritage, its intellectual heritage, I suppose, has become a hub for that too. So that it's not that they're kind of starting from scratch. These festivals are a natural extension of the houses anyway. So that seems to me to be something that they all have in common. The other thing I think these festivals have in common, certainly that's relevant to anyone who owns a country house who's considering doing something similar, or indeed a festival per se, is although they're country houses and therefore we think they're fuddy-duddy and old and have lots of oversights and so on visiting, pretty much each one of these festivals is very contemporary in how it approaches festivals. I mean, each one of them, as I hope I've explained, is, whether it has amazing outreach programs or is, really at the cutting edge of whatever it happens to be doing, autonomous cars, incredible light fixtures, in the woods of House and whatever. They really are going out there and trying to sort of max out on how much innovation they can put into the festivals. So that they're not in any way fuddy-duddy, and even the ones that are being a bit fuddy-duddy, like, for example, Goodwood Revival, does so in a very contemporary way. So there's a huge amount of imagination, basically.
Yeah, it's a reminder, isn't it, that country houses, whilst being rooted in heritage and sort of surrounded by beauty and drenched in beauty, have had to adapt to survive, isn't it? And it links, I suppose, with their heritage, because you think about somewhere like Cliveden, which has historically for centuries hosted salons and gatherings of interesting intellectuals and all sorts of people. Yeah. A literary festival, for example, at Cliveden is a natural 21st century evolution of that idea. Yeah. So it's been really, really interesting talking about. It's been fun actually covering lots of different houses and
Yeah, it
different
has, hasn't it?
in one episode. I've really enjoyed it. You've taught me a lot. Thank you, Rory, for shedding so much light on these festivals. To our
You're very
lovely,
welcome.
please do sign up to any, particularly the Vache, which we recorded the episode on last week, which Rory and I will be attending ourselves.
Yes.
The first weekend of September. I think we're going on the Sunday. So please do, if you'd like to meet us in person, grab a drink with us, sign up. The link is in our bio on our Instagram, or you can go onto the Vache Baroque website to sign up. We'd love you to meet you, have a conversation. And
drop us a comments. We love comments. Comments and ratings.
Comments. Like us if you've enjoyed this episode, and join us again next week as we continue to explore the wonderful world of country houses. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.